right. Hey, folks. Welcome to the webinar. And tonight we are tackling what I call the ultimate epigenetic topic, being nutrition. Nutrition is such an important topic because it influences everything from endocrine function to gut biome status, the liver, the nervous system, the mitochondria. And honestly, it can even potentiate or help to eliminate disease states, right? So food is really powerful, and it's one of those levers that we can pull because you're taking it in every day. It's information that we put into our body daily that influences a whole bunch of stuff downstream from that. And I think that the paradigm shift here that we aim to move towards is that of bio individuality, right? Because there is no one human diet that's applicable across the board. The ultimate effect of a certain type of food or nutrient on the body is not dependent on the intrinsic characteristics of the food or the nutrient itself. The variable is the person. And that's what determines if a diet works or not. It's about you and your unique requirements. So, genes are obviously a fantastic tool for identifying what diet is going to support your physiology the best. So that's what we're going to dive into tonight. And of course, here to discuss this with me is the all powerful and all wise Dr. Stephanie Nielsen. Welcome.
Good evening. Good evening. Well, I love this new year nutrition. Nutrition so that we can all figure out what is the best diet. What I think that's the biggest thing people say when they come to my practice is, well, what's best for me? And, I think that the great thing that we can do now that we couldn't do 40 years ago when I was so sick was say, well, let's look at your DNA and let's hone in on what you're built for. And then let's have you try it and let's find the one that works the best for you. Because how many times have you heard people say, well, my girlfriend went on this, diet and she looks great and I gained weight? Or somebody says, my friend did this and they're sleeping through the night and they've never felt better and they're having better sex and their skin is clear and I'm a wreck. So whether it's a man, a woman, old, young, it's like, oh, everybody's doing but it doesn't work for me.
Yeah, and that's honestly something that drives me bananas because there's so many people that, even in all honesty, they found the right diet for them, but then they promote it as being the diet that everyone should be on. And I don't think that there's any dishonesty or snake oil salesmanship going on there. I think that they genuinely landed in a place that actually worked for them and they're excited about it. But then the mistake is when they turn around and say, well, now this is the best diet for humans. I've heard that about keto, paleo, carnivore. I mean, you name it. This is the ideal human diet. We're talking about 7 billion people that are from all manner of different climates and different things. I don't think that the one ideal diet for humans exists. There's way too many variables there. So we need to find different metrics and different ways to kind of whittle it down what works best for you. And that's bio individuality. And that's what the genetic considerations are all about.
So I'm wondering how many types of different eating plans, I'm not even going to call them diets, I'm going to call them eating plans, have you tried in your life?
Probably all of them except for pure vegan. I haven't quite got that far yet because I like meat too much. But I went on keto even before a lot of people were talking about keto back in the day, and there was certainly some benefits, but I wasn't able to sustain it. And I went on the bodybuilding diet, right? So just chicken, rice, and broccoli 10 times a day and doing that whole thing, and different hybrids and carb cycling and carb backloading and on and on. And then once I finally got my genetic test done, it sort of made sense that I was in this category where most of my like substrates, I should be getting my energy from fatty acids, but then I should up the ante now and again with carbohydrates. So now I kind of landed in this hybrid space. And we'll talk about what all these genetic considerations mean, but full keto or full carbohydrate based, like starch based diet, neither one of those was ideal for me. I landed right in the middle with both of those. But it's this cycle of trial and error that you have to go through, which is a huge pain. And now you can just swab your cheek and send it away to us, and we can tell you what works best for you without all of that rigmarole.
And speaking of that, I know we had some pre-webinar questions. Let's look at those webinar questions so we see who we have with us. A little bit of housekeeping. There's a Q&A at the bottom of your screen. That's where we're going to put most of the questions and answers that we'll answer at the end. This is interactive, so Justin and I are going to be talking to you along the way. And as we do that, we may say put a one in the chat. So there's the difference between the chat, which is going to be an immediate thing, and the Q&A, which is we'll get to. Now, while I am a licensed pharmacist, a functional genomic practitioner, a board certified clinical nutritionist, I'm not your clinical nutritionist. So I will be able to give advice, but I will not be able to give specific, this is what you can do, because I don't have all of your history. If you were one of my patients, absolutely not a problem. So with that in mind, let's talk about this new year nutrition and what's your biggest struggle? According to our survey, 17% said cravings, 12% said low energy, 15% said slow metabolism. So I'm interested. When somebody says low energy and slow metabolism, they're definitely different, but I think a lot of people lump them in together. I think if they have low energy, they think they have slow metabolism. Metabolism is how your cells interact with substances. And so your food is the only fuel your body truly understands. Can it take it in? Can it break it down? Can it process it? Can it utilize it? That's what we mean by metabolism. Bloating and digestive issues, 28%, or all of the above, 28%. And the thing that I'll tell you about that, we're pretty even across the board about we've got a little bit of everything, or let's lump it all together. And I think people who have cravings and low energy and slow metabolism and digestive issues, you're right. It's all of it. What do you think, Justin?
Yeah, it's all of the above because, like I said right in the opening, nutrition impacts each and every system in the body, right? So, like, every cell needs to be fueled by something. And for some people, they just add a baseline or better with that. It's called beta oxidation, right? Where you're using more fatty acids, and the mitochondria and the Krebs cycle understand how to use that a little bit better. And for some people, your body just naturally does glycolysis better and it knows how to break things down into glucose properly. And some people land in the middle where it's like there's times when we want to be running on ketones and beta oxidation, and times when we up the ante and get some glucose in there. So that's that metabolic flexibility. But it's like the substrate that you take in is going to either be totally efficient, not efficient at all, or somewhere in the middle. And it lends itself to all of the different functions that the body uses fuel for. So it's all of the above. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think one of the things for you to remember is when you change the fuel you put in your body, that's not a diet. There are diets. Most people, when they think of diet, they think of weight loss. I want you to think of diet as health gain. I am less concerned about losing your weight as much as recovering that metabolism, recovering your energy, recovering your gut, because guess what? Your body will right size when it's got the right fuel and when it's learning to utilize it. So let's dig a little deeper. Do you think that your genes impact your hunger and your cravings? Yes, 63% overwhelming. Yes, they impact it. Maybe 24%, 5% not really, and 8% said, I don't really know. And Justin, what do you think about this?
Well, so there's two different things to consider, right? There's our genes and then there's our epigenetic decisions that we make day after day. I call this thing alignment with your assignment, right? Because it's like we are assigned these genes and that's how our body works because genes, they encode these enzymes that do all these different jobs in the body. So when we try to operate out of alignment with our assignment, that's when we run into a lot of these metabolic issues. Now, it's not to say that you don't ever want to dabble in different substrates to create that metabolic flexibility, but your day after day eating, if you're out of alignment with what your genes say, it's going to be harder for your cells to metabolize those nutrients. So to me, the genes are really that underlying blueprint that you want to work with. It's way more work to try to kind of work against it than it is to work with it. So pull your decisions into alignment with your genetic blueprint and your metabolism can kind of just fix itself. And it's a funny thing too, that oftentimes I get clients that their goal isn't necessarily weight loss, But just as a byproduct of our alignment process and getting the different nutrients shored up and things and fixing detox and all the different stuff we look at, their body composition ends up elevating and improving just because of our alignment process. And that isn't even what they came to me for, right? We just kind of land you in that scenario because we align everything to your genes and stuff just starts to make sense and click.
Yeah. I also think that hunger and cravings in particular get back to gut issues. And we'll get into that when we talk about eating in alignment for what your body is going through and eating out of alignment where you may be feeding those bad bugs. And if you're feeding those bad bugs, cravings and hunger and weight issues are going to be much tougher to handle. How confident do you feel about knowing what diet works for you? 12% said very. Cool. That's awesome. So what are you doing here? Actually, you maybe probably can. I know that you'll take away at least one tip, but I'm glad that you're that confident. So chime in. 60% roughly said somewhat, and 30% said not at all. So for that 90%, that's what we're here for. We're here to say, okay, if you've had your DNA 360, you're going to want to get it out. If you haven't had your DNA 360, by the time we're at the end of this, we're going to offer you a discount code so that you can get it because you're going to see how critically important it is to know your genes, know your pathway, and get your nutrition in order. All right, number 4, which eating pattern appeals to you most? Now, this could be appeals to you when you answered it as, I like the idea, I've tried it, it works for me, or you can also think about, okay, this is what I've seen most people doing and I'm just comfortable with it. So high protein, 25%, Mediterranean, 40%, low carb, 5%, plant focused, 13%, or I have no idea, about 20%, 15 to 20%. So why don't we go through each of these for a minute and talk about what each one of these mean, just so that everybody's on the same playing field. When somebody says high protein, what does that mean? Justin?
Yeah, so when you break down what that plate looks like, right, we've only got three options here. We've got proteins and we've got fats and we've got carbohydrates. Within those, there's different little subcategories, but protein prioritization can certainly be a very useful tool. I think that protein is valuable. We need amino acids to initiate phase 2 detoxification, and we need it to prevent sarcopenia. Amino acids are actually used to create neurotransmitters in the body, and there's a lot of benefit there. It's a little bit of a nuanced conversation, though, because if you take in more protein than your body has the capacity to break down, it will, in fact, break down and convert to glucose. And then you may as well have just eaten more carbohydrates, right? So there's a few different things to consider. We need enough proteolytic enzymes like peptidases and proteases. You need to make sure that your liver function is on point. We look at genes in your glutathione profile that are relative to that. We need to have enough hydrochloric acid. If that's a little bit low, you can't break it down properly. And protein will ferment at high amounts if you don't have the right kind of digestive makeup for that. So we look at genes like GSTT1 and GSTM1, and we really try to identify if the higher protein diet is going to do you good or if it's going to do some damage there.
So I'm going to slow you down for a second. There were a few key things you said, and I want to make sure that everybody understood. Sarco what?
Sarcopenia, the loss of muscle mass, which is actually a silent epidemic that a lot of people don't talk about. We talk a lot about obesity, but I'm telling you, frailty and the loss of muscle mass is as relevant. A lot of people suffer with that, and there's injuries and things that take place that there's no need for that to happen. But people who don't get enough amino acids or just don't break down protein well enough to get the amino acids, sarcopenia can absolutely happen. And I've seen it. I've worked with a lot of people who have that. Not
So
you.
this is what we're going to say is muscle is key. Okay, guys, the older we get, the more we've got to have them. The bigger your muscles are, like your glutes, your buns, and your thighs, you've got to work those. Ladies, I'm talking to you. You got to be able to get up and down off the toilet, get up and down out of your chairs, get in and out of a car. I have watched my mother, who is 88, in the last 5 years go from being completely independent to now being very dependent because she didn't work those major muscles. Now, you need to work all of them and go through it, but she literally fell down out of her shower and could not get herself up onto her knees to crawl for help. She'd taken off her little alarm bracelet. Took her 20 minutes to crawl across the floor, drag herself with her arms, drag, rest, drag, rest, drag, rest, 20 minutes before she could pull an alarm to get help because she could not get off the floor. Don't let yourself become this. High protein is key, but too high, as Justin said, is just as detrimental. So we've got to find the right amount of protein, and we'll get that into a little bit later when we talk about high protein. So carnivore is what people think of high protein, and the Lion's diet, people are talking about high protein. Again, you've got to have protein, whether it's animal-based protein or vegetable plant-based protein. There are high protein foods, but you've got to have the right amount, and you've got to make sure it's breaking it down. So a second thing that you said was hypochlorhydria or low stomach acid. Talk to us about digestion and low stomach acid, because there's so many people on drugs, whether it's Zantac, Tagamet, PPIs, omeprazole, Nexium, Protonix. What happens when you don't have stomach acid?
Yeah, stomach acid is one of those really important metrics for how your body actually breaks down food. The human digestive system is supposed to be really acidic. It's like 1 to 3 on the pH scale, which is like crazy acidic. And when we suppress that with an antacid, it really detriments your body's ability to use it to break down foods. Imagine what it takes to break down a piece of steak in your body. Like it's really hard. It takes some doing to do that. You have to do that to get the requisite amino acids, the creatine, all these good things out of that steak. I know a lot of people that have acid reflux and they utilize these antacids, and it gives you a really temporary benefit, but they ultimately end up burping up bile instead, right? And a lot of these issues that people have that are reflux are actually just bile secretion because the gallbladder freaks out and releases bile. So it's already low, and then you lower it further. That can cause even more issues because now you're not breaking down and absorbing nutrients. So hypochlorhydria is pretty common, and it's something that you can fix pretty easily. One thing that I would bear in mind, though, is that be a bit careful with some of your strategies for improving stomach acid levels if you happen to have H. pylori present. So I recommend people get gut mapping done because H. pylori, you want to be careful if that's elevated. You don't want to take a bunch of like betaine hydrochloride, things that up the acid levels. You can feed the H. pylori if you're not careful. So gut mapping is really important, but you do want to make sure that you have enough HCl, and you can use apple cider vinegar and lemon juice and different things to up that. But know your gut status a little bit before you go dabbling there.
So two more things that led it to. A lot of times when people have upset stomachs, they actually have too low of hydrochloric acid and they think they have high because of the indigestion. As you said, first thing in the morning, lemon juice and water, apple cider vinegar, those will stimulate your body to start secreting the acids that can then eventually take on the meal that you'll be ingesting, whether you eat breakfast or whether you delay intermittent fasting. Fasting is a great way to help regulate, but the number one thing you can do is chew, chew, chew. You've got to break that food down. It is meant to start processing and digesting in our mouth. And unfortunately, most of us eat so quickly, so fast, it's chew, chew, swallow. I mean, I've seen pieces of steak. I had a guy who literally choked on a piece of steak that was this size. I ended up giving him the Heimlich maneuver at a very high-end restaurant. He was morbidly, embarrassed, but he took a chunk, bite, swallow, stuck, because my mom used to say it should go no more than on the end of your fork and you should chew 30 times. Now, I would say that's a bit excessive because then it becomes baby food and it's like nobody likes that. But digestion begins in your mouth. And if you have digestive issues, get back to the basics by breaking it down in your mouth, masticating, getting those digestive processes going before it gets to your stomach. Okay, next one was Mediterranean. So let's give a definition of Mediterranean diet and why that is so popular.
Yeah, the Mediterranean diet it's honestly a great diet, again, if it's for you. And it's a traditional eating pattern that's based on the cuisines of countries that border the Mediterranean Sea, right? So Greece, Italy, Spain. It's definitely up there as far as, blue zone relativity and things. And it's fairly plant forward, right? So they do use a lot of vegetables, fruits, legumes. They do use whole grains, but remember, it's not North America whole grains, which have been messed with quite a bit. And then they use a lot of just high quality fats, right? Extra virgin olive oil and avocados and things like that, plus a lot of seafood, of course, bordering the sea. So you're getting high quality omega 3s in there. You're getting stuff that's recognizable from the earth. And so I do think that it's pretty good as like an anti inflammatory, gut friendly diet. It's just, once again, some people don't process plants as well, fats as well, etc. So even within a high quality Mediterranean diet, there's nuances and genetic considerations because you may do better with a higher starch Mediterranean diet or a higher fat Mediterranean diet. So, even that, right, I would say you should tailor it towards your genetics to get the best possible gene expression.
It's also interesting. The latest medical literature talks about the Mediterranean diet and in accordance to the blue zones. Most people know that blue zones are primarily vegetarian. However, the founder of the blue zones actually came out and said, we found the blue zones were actually none of them were pure vegetarian. However, that fits in to our paradigm, and that's what we've chosen to express. It's really disappointing to me that we have science that says primarily plant-based, but seafood or some animal foods, whether it's dairy or eggs or something, are included in those diets, yet they chose to exclude them and then develop a following and recipes that are exclusive of some of those things that are actually included. So what we're finding is in a lot of the research, not all, but a lot of the research is tailored to what the research wants you to hear. So we're going to try to stay with fact-based only. And just because there isn't research doesn't mean that there isn't data. The best research is the N of one. Number one, you have a PhD in you. You'll know if something's working or not working. So I want you to really go, gosh, I tried that before and it didn't work for me. So how can we help you tweak it? Let's talk low carb.
Yeah, I'm also a primal health coach. That's like my original health coaching certification. And it's really strongly tied to this low carb community, right? The carnivore community, the low carb paleo kind of approaches. And I'll say that in the spirit of metabolic flexibility, having periods where you have lower carbs is definitely beneficial. And there's different ways that you can orchestrate that. But let's say you have a totally suboptimal ApoA2 gene, and that's the gene that's relative to fatty acid metabolism. And then let's say you have the totally optimal AMY1 gene, that's that salivary amylase gene, and that's how your body metabolizes starches. This is not an individual that's going to have a lot of metabolic benefit to going on, especially a longer term low carb diet. You can maybe cycle it in, but again, alignment with your assignment. Your blueprint suggests that you actually metabolize starches better and you get energy more efficiently out of those starches. So for those people, you definitely don't want to go on a ketogenic diet, a full on carnivore diet, and just generally being low carb year round. You're not giving your body the actual metabolic benefit, and you would do better with the sweet potatoes and the rice, etc. There are people that do much better on those kinds of diets, believe it or not. And again, to Dr. Steph's point, there's these communities that get developed around these different dietary strategies, and then everybody turns around and says, you're going to eat starches, you're going to eat carbs, aren't you worried about your blood sugar, your insulin, etc.? If I know that my genes are in alignment there and I feel great on these starches, then it's for you. There's communities like the Aztecs, for example, that had 2,000 different species of potatoes. They said there's a potato for every sickness, and most of their diet was based on starches, and they did not have diabetes and all these different insulinogenic problems. So some people are wired based on their ancestry and their enzyme activity to eat starches 3 squares a day with no metabolic consequence. And we don't have to do all this crazy ancestry mapping anymore. We can just use the genes and see what you landed with from your actual ancestors. It's a really cool thing.
Well, and it's also how you prepare it because you can take potatoes, you can take rice, you cook them, then you chill them, and then you reheat them, and they become resistant starches. So they don't break down the same. They don't spike your blood sugar the same. And so those are ways to consume those. Now, I happen to be low carb and I'm very low carb and I thrive on that. But there are times my body says, and especially because I combine fasting. If you look up the work from Dr. Peltz, Fasting Like a Girl, there are times in our cycles that we need more carbs. And at first, I was like hardcore fasting like a boy and getting exhausted. And I got racy hearts and I was gaining fat. Even though I was losing weight, I was gaining fat. I'm like, whoa, this is not the right thing. Sarcopenia, right in the face. But when I started fasting like a girl, meaning parts of my cycle, I ate really low carb. Parts of my cycle, it was a feast time where I added different of the sweet potatoes or yams or other starches in and thrive. My brain thrived, my body thrived, gained the muscle mass back real quickly. So there's a lot of nuance to that. The last one is plant focused. So I know we've kind of incorporated this in a little bit of it, but let's talk about people who are primarily plant-based.
Yeah, and it's an important distinction between plant-based and full-on like raw vegan. Same with the distinction between animal-based and full-on carnivore, right? There's kind of the extremes of all of these diets, and then there's areas where it's like most of my plate is going to be animals or most of my plate is going to be plants. I would say that the plant-focused community, there's some benefits to taking in a lot of plethora of different plants because you get different prebiotic fibers and you can really keep your gut happy in that way, but there's also a pretty strong preponderance of like food sensitivities. Some people can't handle the lectins, the oxalates, the phytic acid. We all know seed oils are plants, gluten is plants. So not all plants are necessarily your friend. And the way that I look at it is that certain plants we're just ready to have a relationship with, and some of them we're not, right? We haven't evolved to a point where we can just blatantly go consume plants. If you think that's the case, wander out into the woods and just start picking stuff up and eating it and see how well that goes for you. That is not my actual advice. Please don't do that, folks. Um, but the plant-based community, I think that if you can incorporate the right macronutrient structure, right, like you could have a higher fat or lower fat strategy with keeping predominantly, plants, or you could do higher or lower starches, and kind of it's obvious that that's a lot of plants. So if you're going to go plant-based because you have kind of ethical concerns or whatever, you can still tailor that towards the ideal macronutrient structure by using your genes, right? So this is still an important consideration whether you're eating animals, plants. Use your genes to guide you because they are how your blueprint actually works.
Great. And then our fifth question was, if you could optimize only one thing in 2026 with your nutrition, what would it be? 41% said weight management. Remember, when we get this right, when you're in alignment with your assignment, you will right size. 2% said mood. So we don't have a bunch of moody people here. I'm happy for that. We're glad. 13% said energy. When we get that metabolism right, that energy will soar. Digestion, key. 15% and inflammation. Inflammation goes back to digestion. So if you put digestion and inflammation together, we're going to talk about 45%, about 50%. Now we've got some really good places to build off of, and that's what we're here for you. So, one of the things that we want to really go through is appetite and cravings. And we started talking about that. I want you to know that while you're made up of hundreds of billions of cells, do you know that the bacteria and the parasites and the protozoa and all the thing in your body, you have multiple trillions. So when people talk about probiotics, and I'm taking a probiotic and it's a single lactobacillus acidophilus, it's like sneeze, okay? You've got so many different types of bacteria. You've got to feed a variety. That's why what's more important are prebiotics and postbiotics. You've got to feed your garden. I want you to look at prebiotics as the fertilizer for your garden, and this is going to impact your appetite and cravings. Now, here's something that may be kind of gross, so hold on if you're squeamish, is your probiotics really are only supposed to be in your colon, like the last 5 feet before you exit with your bowel movements in your anus. Unfortunately, we eat so much crud and unreal things, and people are not eliminating enough or frequently, and they don't have those good acids to break everything down. We are now seeing the fecalization of our population. And SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and SIFO, small intestinal fungal overgrowth, you're now having feces and those bacteria crawl up into your small intestine. Now, if you do a colonoscopy, they're only going up 2, 3 feet. They're not even getting all 5 feet. And they're certainly not going up into your small intestine. And if you have an EDG, which goes down through the top, you get through your stomach and you might get through the first valve into the upper part of your small intestine. But the rest of it, they can see on x-ray and they can see you are full of, okay? And all of that is where that bacteria is growing. And like Justin said, if you're out of sync with your H. pylori, you could end up feeding it. So appetite and cravings have to do, let's talk about those genes and not feeding those bad bacteria, not having those cravings, and how you're in alignment. So now if you have your DNA profile, you can pull it up and look for some of these. If you don't, you can write them down. And if you don't have either one of those, you will get a replay of this and you can go back and pull up your data and look. So let's talk about 3 or 4 genes that work with appetite and cravings and how they work in the body.
Yeah, and there's a couple of ways to kind of map it out, right? So we have genes that are pretty zoomed in on satiety and appetite regulation, and they're really impacting ghrelin and leptin signaling in the body. And then we also have our mood and behavior genes that I always draw into these conversations when I'm actually with a client, because I like to know what your dopamine pathway looks like for this. I like to know what your anxiety pathway looks like for this. But speaking to the satiety specific genes, we have two that are really primary here. So there's one called FTO. They call it the fat and obesity gene. I don't like that because we know there's a lot more to it. There is no N=1 isolated gene that says I'm going to be obese. But what this really is the brain gut axis, right? This bidirectional signal that happens in the body means that your brain communicates with your gut and your gut can communicate with your brain. There's signaling going back and forth there all the time. And FTO is one of those signals. It basically means that in the gut, when you start chewing down food and swallowing food, there's going to be a signal that goes from the gut to the brain to say, hey, we're good. And we don't need any more servings. We don't need any more calories. We're all set. For people that have a dysregulated FTO gene, that signal is way slower, right? So by the time it actually hits your brain, you've already gone back, right? You've doled out another portion, another 2 portions. That's a problem, right? So when we have dysregulation there, it means that we have to have more strategies in place to kind of help speed the signal up. Maybe it's
So this
like
is kind of like when we're in the grocery store and we're in the frozen section and we're by the ice cream and our thighs start quivering and we don't get one pack, we get 2 or 3, right? And we have to have one in the car going home and then we eat dinner and then another one afterwards.
Yeah, so bear this in mind when you're shopping as well, right? Because that's what determines what's in your pantry. It's funny, I do these pantry purges with people sometimes as part of our programs, and I make them go through their house and just cut out the things that I know that they're just not going to be serving them very well.
Well, he's talking about throwing out. He's like, get a container and throw this stuff out.
Yeah,
And they're like,
before it hits you. um, and yeah, there's other strategies too, right? So it's like chewing the heck out of your food, like Dr. Steph said. That alone can help to kind of get these signals moving a bit better. I think gratitude, honestly, like just having that appreciation for your food also matters a lot, because not only does it put your body in a parasympathetic state so that you can receive the nutrients better, but it also helps you to kind of appreciate the food and not consider it some throwaway thing. Like we don't have the same connection to the food that we used to have in ancestral times, because it's just a simple exchange of funds now. We go and we pick it up off a shelf and now we have it. Before, we had to literally murder stuff, chase something down. That you have a way different relationship with the food when you had to physically go do that. So even just taking a moment while you're cooking the food, right, and throw it on the pan and hear it sizzle and smell it and just be part of it. I think that can help with this FTO gene. And then it's a matter of not overcooking, like cooking too much. There's things like Garcinia cambogia. There's things like ketones that can help you with the appetite regulation there. But that's FTO. And if you're dysregulated there, the inherent tendency is to overeat because of a simple signal that doesn't get to your brain in time.
And so we'll talk a little bit about some of those strategies kind of that Justin just alluded to. One of the things that I really love is the MC4R. The MC4R is also associated with cravings, but especially sugar and high fat foods. And I know for a lot of us, those are our weakness. But the beautiful part of that is that a high fat food, fat and protein, are the only two substances that create an enzyme called cholecystokinin. I love that word. It rolls off my tongue. Cholecystokinin. But cholecystokinin says, I'm full. If I have a pound of potato chips and I have a pound of sliced turkey, can I get through that pound of sliced turkey? I won't. I'll get a quarter of a pound or a half a pound and I'm like, I am stuffed. But if I go through that chips, and you know how Lay's potato chips used to say, you can't eat just one. It's right. Because they had that carbohydrate, that simple carbohydrate that then has the bad fats on it, and all the salt stimulates your mouth to then crave more. And you'll go through that whole pound bag and go, oh my God, I ate the whole bag and I'm still hungry. You haven't triggered that MC4R and you haven't triggered the cholecystokinin to say shut down because I don't need anymore. I am satisfied. That's why I like a lot of the nutrition plans that say eat till comfortably full. Then pause, sit at the table for another 15, 20 minutes chatting and say, am I full? Do I need more? If you leave the table hungry, your body has not received those signals and you're more likely to snack later. Do you have anything else about the MC4R that you like to recommend?
Yeah, I think that, in the poll when we talked about protein prioritization, I think that people who have this dysregulation in MC4R as well as FTO, these are the people that are going to do pretty well on the protein prioritization protocol because it's exactly to your point, you can only eat a certain amount of protein in one sitting. And also there's a thing called the thermic effect of feeding, which means that it actually takes a certain amount of energy and calories to break down and utilize protein as well. So it's a fantastic strategy for people who just inherently overeat those hyper palatable fats and carbohydrates. So I'm a big fan of that. Again, chewing the heck out of your food, especially with the MC4R, because the sensations in your mouth, right? I mean, that helps to speed the signal up as well. And then your saliva will change the pH of the food and it does different stuff to pre-digest it, quote unquote. So I also think that for MC4R, if you can seek out a lot of different flavor profiles, that also helps as well. So don't avoid the spices and the different things that don't add calorie count, but do make it a lot more palatable. Because you could take a normal hunk of steak, but put on all kinds of fantastic stuff, right? And you're going to get more sensory stuff going on there, and that speeds up that signal from MC4R. So don't be afraid to use spices. They're full of polyphenols and antioxidants, especially if they're good quality organic spices. They can even help to lower the blood sugar effect. Like you can use cinnamon rubs and coffee rubs and get creative with your food, folks, because it can help to add nutritional value and then make you more full at the end of the day.
One of the spices that I like or spice kind of additions is called pluck, Pluck. And pluck are actually bovine organs, so kidneys, heart, liver, but they taste nothing like that. And they have a garlic zesty, they have a spicy, which isn't really spicy. They have the original that kind of tastes like Mrs. Dash. But especially if you have kids that are fussy with they only want carbohydrates and you put this on, it's kind of a salt and peppery spice flavor or herbaceous, flavoring. They're actually getting that nutrient density like a multivitamin, especially, but it's not a Flintstone sweet thing. We put a tendency to so much sweet when kids are younger. If you have a tendency to have them savory, they'll have less problems with sweets later. But pluck is a great way to add spices, flavor, and nutrition that's nutriently dense. And so much of eating is emotional, and that's why there's two genes that are really tied to emotions, especially dopamine. Why do we tap on our phones all the time? Why do we check the clock all the time? Why do we, it's because we're stimulating dopamine. And we have both the DRD2 and the ADRA2B. Do you want to address dopamine and food?
Yeah, I mean that pleasure and reward pathway is so important for this. It's something that we've unfortunately disrupted quite a bit modern day because there's more opportunities to effectively get that dopaminergic response than there ever was in our ancestors' day. Right? They didn't have a whole lot to spike their dopamine with. Whereas for us, with technologies and different things, it's pretty much consistently being stimulated. And when you have a lot of that dopaminergic response going on all day long, what happens is your dopamine baseline starts to adjust and it takes more to actually get any kind of a sensation. We look at the density itself of the dopamine receptor because some people are differently genetically wired there to where they get a more intense dopamine hit from different things, right? So that's that DRD2 gene. It actually encodes the density of the dopamine receptor. If you have really minimal density there, it means that you're not going to get a lot of that sensation of pleasure or reward. There's good and bad in that, right? Because if you don't ever feel reward from the things you do, then the likelihood of depressive tendencies is going to be amplified. But if you're what we call a high binder of dopamine, you have that higher density of the DRD2 receptor, it means that you're that much more likely to have addictive or binging tendencies as well. And that's something that's certainly relevant for food. If I'm dealing with a client who's overweight, I like to look at the FTO and MC4R gene and I bounce it off that DRD2 because let's say you're dysregulated and you have high dopamine, it's that much more likely that food is going to be that vice of choice, right? You're just never satisfied and you go back to it and you go back to it. And so that's a really relevant pathway. And it's important as well to understand that we do look at the COMT gene here because COMT matters. It's a clearance mechanism for dopamine as well as noradrenaline. So some people have longer versions of that COMT gene. This is in your mood and behavior profile. If you have the longer version, it means that the dopamine doesn't clear very quick and it sticks around a long time, and that lends itself to that binging tendency. If you have the shorter version of COMT, it means that you feel the dopamine hit and it goes away so quick that you end up going back to it way quicker. So that's the person that just will eat the chips, put it down, but then pick it up again. And that's the addictive tendency as well. So addiction and binging are actually two separate things, but both problematic in their own right.
Absolutely. So we talked about protein, we've talked about, the satisfying, but food intolerances and digestion. You've heard people say all disease begins in the gut. Let's talk about food intolerances and digestion. I can tell you, I love carbs, but the body only needs two things. It needs protein and it needs fat. We can live without carbs because, as Justin said, if you get too much protein and the body doesn't have carbs, it will actually convert your protein into glucose. Carbs should be quality in any of your food. And I've taken a lot of families that say it is so expensive to eat well. It's so expensive to convert to eating well, from eating crappy to eating real. But once you convert, it is so easy to eat real because you're not doing these high price packaged perform things. So I can tell you that, at Christmas time, we did turkey. And from the turkey, I then made a bunch of bone broth. And I saved that bone broth. And then I peeled all the turkey off and I used some of the broth and I made turkey soup. And so from that turkey soup, I had this big vat of it. And after 3, 4, 5 days, people are like, I've had enough of it. Well, I could convert that into chicken pot pies or turkey pot pies. I then decided I didn't want all those additional carbs because my Amy gene is way too high and I look at carbs and I put on weight. So I converted it into a fat laden, because I do well with fat, Thai coconut soup. So I added coconut milk I added lots of the spices and flavors. I added citrus and vinegars that help with digestion. Took the whole different flavor profile. And again, we were able to eat that for several days. So there are lots of ways that I use that one turkey, and we only did a turkey breast because our kids are all grown and moved out and stuff. But I still have been able to feed an army for over 2 weeks with that single turkey. So remember that you can utilize. Don't get lost in I don't know how to cook or I don't like the way I cook. Like any skill, it may take time to learn, but it's worth learning. And so in digestion, some people can handle carbs, some people can handle dairy, some people can handle fat and can't. The AMY gene, AMY1, is the carb digestion efficiency. I am super efficient. And because I am super efficient, I take a carbohydrate, I break it into sugar. Remember, carbs, starches turn into sugar. Sugar spikes your insulin, spikes your blood sugar. Insulin is released, spikes your insulin, grabs it, packs it away as fat. So when somebody says, I just look at cake, and I gain weight, they probably have a very fast AMY gene and they break those carbs down so quickly and their body goes into instant starvation or into instant storage mode, not starvation, storage mode, and they pack that on. One of the best ways for you to manage this is again, looking at intermittent fasting, looking at eating your proteins and your fats first, and then saving your carbs after you've got a little protein and fat in your gut. Justin, what else do you say for people who have really fast AMY genes?
There's also little ways. I mean, you already mentioned like resistant starches, which I'm a big fan of
Mhm.
because it has a lot less of that glucose impact as well. A couple other strategies that I like to work on with people would be postprandial movement, right? So,
Mhm.
meaning if you do take in some of those carbohydrates, just even if you go for a walk around the neighborhood afterward, or it could be jumping on a trampoline or grabbing a kettlebell and doing some swings, getting a bit of movement there means that your body takes the excess glucose and kind of puts it into the muscle tissue. So that's valuable. I would also say that.
Hold on one second. Postprandial means after you eat. So
Yes.
after you eat, it sounds silly. Go for a 20 or 30-minute walk. Walk up and down your stairs. Clean your house. If you will move for those 20 to 30 minutes, you will move all that blood sugar out of your vessels and into your muscles, and you will lower the insulin spike and put on less weight. So sit down and eat, focus while you eat, and then get up and move as soon as you're done eating.
Yeah, and to sit down and eat is an important part as well. That ties into the gratitude that I mentioned. Taking a
Mhm.
little moment and actually sitting down with your food, it makes it so that you're not eating in this sympathetic state. And I'm so guilty of that because I'm very type A and I just kind of I get my meal and I pace around. I'm thinking about the next thing I'm supposed to do. That's a bad call. That's something I've had to work on. Sit and be with your meal. That makes it so that you digest it a lot better. Beyond that, I would say that other ways to incorporate starches, if you do have that suboptimal AMY1, would be to time it for after your workout, right? So that's called carb backloading. You can also carb backload by just saving it for like one portion of the day. I like to do it post exercise because that's when your glycogen is absolutely depleted. And then when you take in your starches, they're going to serve a purpose of benefiting your recovery and actually accelerating muscle growth and things like that. So I work on different carb timing strategies with people pretty often, either backloading, front loading. I think carb cycling is a fantastic strategy as well, which would mean that you go a few days, several days. For some people, if you're really overweight, you can do like 2 weeks low carb and then pick the time when you want to up the ante and you'll just stock cook a bunch of rice and then you'll have a day where you kind of reload all of those storages. And that's a tool for metabolic flexibility. And I think it works pretty good. But again, I would only do that if your genes are in kind of a hybrid state or if you want to incorporate starches, but you don't have high quality genes there. You're going to want to find a way to incorporate it without basing your energy metabolism on that. You never want to do the 3 times a day starch intake if you have suboptimal AMY1 or if you have suboptimal TCF7L2. That
Mhm.
gene regulates the insulin response, and that's in your diet report and your cardiovascular report because it has to do with that blood sugar management. If you're suboptimal for either one of those, or heaven forbid, both of those, you certainly don't want to be taking in volume of starches every day. You want to find ways to incorporate it to get the benefit without metabolic consequence. And that's how we create the flexibility.
So I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping right now. I see several questions about where do we put questions because we're coming to the top of the hour. I can't believe we're not even halfway through. I think we're going to have to make this into a two-parter. Okay, so you've already heard this, DNA Co. That we're going to have part one. We will give them the 5 different forms, but we're going to have to come back because we're not going to get through nearly enough. There's a Q&A section you can put down in the Q&A section. We will be answering that. And we are going to be offering you some discounts because if you haven't had your DNA 360 done, you're going to want to get that. And we're going to give you a discount on that. For those of you who are already saying, I've got gut issues, where do I go? What do I do? We do have a DNA Gut 360, and this is going to go through your good bacteria, your bad bacteria, what your percentages are, and really help you be able to work that out. And then it comes with consultation after that to make sure you're on your right diet plan, make sure that we're helping you get that killed off. And there are natural ways to do that. We will be putting some links in for that. So what we're going to do is, I know we've talked a little bit about the cravings. I know we're going through digestion right now. I think after that, as much as I'd like to do absorption and detox and energy and fat, we're going to have to save that for part 2. But we're going to go into 5 personality types that based on your genes. Now, if you've done DNA 360, great. Get the DNA app and you'll be able to look up which personality type you are. If you haven't done it, you've done 23andMe. You can upload your 23andMe raw data and get some of that. If you want to have a consult because you're just not sure kind of where you stand, we're going to put an email in here where you can have somebody contact you, kind of go through what a consult would look like and see if we can help personalize a fitness or nutrition program based on your DNA. So do you want to finish maybe a couple other digestion and food intolerance? I know this is personally huge for me because I've had so many food intolerances and so much of my practice has been about autoimmunity and food intolerance.
Yeah, for sure. And there's, food intolerances, there's some of them that can be kind of a moving target, right? If you do like a screening, it's based on the terrain of your gut. It's not a one and done thing. They change and they move. I've seen people that have over 20 different foods that they're reactive to do a bunch of great work on the gut, the mucosal barrier, the liver, right, to get proper bile flow and different things happening. And that list shores up and it gets a lot shorter. But there are a few things that are genetically encoded that we look at as well, and those are going to stay relatively stagnant. So, for example, lactose, right? We have a gene called MCM6 that's in your diet and nutrition profile, and that's going to show if you are just genetically intolerant there, which means as soon as you come off mom's milk, you're intolerant and you can't keep producing that lactase enzyme. And some people are tolerant throughout their lives. Now, if you were to drastically overdo low quality A1 dairy, I think you can still kind of create an intolerance there. But at a genetic standpoint, those people are going to do better with lactose containing dairy. There's also genes like the HLA family of genes. That's the human leukocyte antigen genes, and it's a big family of them. And that really determines gluten intolerance. And it's kind of 3 different categories that we look at with that. So you can either be not intolerant at all genetically, and I'm jealous if that's the case, or you can have full-on celiac level intolerance, which is really intense. Like you can't be in the same room as gluten. Like you'll get a friggin' reaction out of it. Or there's a middle category that's non-celiac gluten sensitivity, where it's just a sensitivity, but it's going to likely create that inflammatory IgE response in the gut, and you don't want that either. We also find this nuance in your glutathione profile that I should touch on, because if you have 2 copies of a gene called GSTM1, that means that you're more likely to have that inflammatory immune response being kicked off when you take in things that you're even a little bit sensitive to. And we find that there's a lot of correlations there between autoimmunity and 2 copies of GSTM1, and you're more likely to get hyperpermeability of the mucosal barrier, leaky gut, that's what that's actually called. And if you have leaky gut on any level, food sensitivities are very likely there. So you're going to want to make sure that you're cutting out all things that you're sensitive to so you can heal the gut. And then pre and probiotics will work so much better for you.
Mhm. And if you have leaky gut, um, occludin is the bricks, zonulin is the mortar. If you have zonulin in your blood tests, then that means your mortar is cracking. If you look at it like a dam, you're starting to have those little, you know, water spouts that the little Dutch boy put his finger in. Okay. You have not broken the dam, but we don't want to get it till it's broken. If you have occludin that they can see, then the bricks have disintegrated. We want to keep this tightly knitted fish net together so that you can't get those fish through. But the bottom line is that we've got to get your microbiome in shape. We've got to get rid of your biofilm, and that requires a series of, it could be 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, or a year of using herbs or using antibiotics or using nutribiotics to break down that film, clean up. If you imagine a house on fire, we have to put the fire out. We then have to clean out the goop. We then have to, rebuild the room, and then we decorate. Most people want to go straight to decorating and they think that's just the probiotics. No, it's all the tear down and it's all the clean out. And if you have SIBO, or if you have H. pylori, or if you have CFO, which is the fungals, you've got to get all of those pathogens kicking themselves out the door and get it back down in the colon and not in your small and colon, and you can get that. But you can recover from this, but it really takes working with someone to get it done. So I know we're at the top of the hour. Let's go through real quickly the 5 DNA types. We've got a carb sensitivity, we've got a fat sensitivity, we've got a stress eater pattern, we've got a circadian mismatch, and we've got a low nutrient type. So Justin, will you start with the carb sensitivity? I know we kind of talked a little bit about this because we talked so much about the FTO, the MC4R, and the AMY1 gene.
Yeah, so this is how we map it out, right? So there's the FTO, the MC4R, and the AMY1 gene. If you were suboptimal for all three of those, I also have to add in the TCF7L2 gene, but these are the ones that are going to be the absolute most carb sensitive and have that most difficulty with blood sugar regulation and insulin response. All of those genes are relevant, and you could be optimal for one and suboptimal for the next, but especially the AMY1 and the TCF7L2, that's going to make you hyper carb sensitive. And then when we have the leptin and the ghrelin dysregulation from FTO and MC4R, it amplifies that response that much more. So those are the ones, and you're super carb sensitive if you're dysregulated there.
And if you are dysregulated and carb sensitive, I really recommend a CGM. That's one of the continuous glucose monitors, goes on the back of your arm or can go on your waist. And you can actually watch and see what foods do what to your blood sugar. And you kind of want just gentle, wavy curves. You don't want giant spikes and then long recovery. And I think you'd be shocked to see some of the things that you think are good foods. I mean, something as simple as zucchini. You're like, well, how could zucchini be bad? But because it's a squash, and particularly food sensitive people, that can do a huge spike. And you're like, well, okay, I can't do that unless I have a lot of fat or unless I do something else to it. So CGM would be really a good something for a carb sensitive type. So the second one is fat sensitive. Now, I know we didn't get to necessarily all these genes, but let's talk about fat sensitive and what they do best with.
Yeah, so with that one, I mean, we did mention the ApoA2 gene, so that's that lipid metabolism. The TCF7L2 insulin response is also of relevance here, especially if you're going to eat a lot of like saturated fats. But another gene that's relevant here is the ApoE gene, right? Because that gene, they call it the Alzheimer's and dementia gene, but it's got a lot to do with how your body uses cholesterol to manage inflammation, because that's what cholesterol actually does. It's very sticky and viscous. So your body uses cholesterol to manage inflammation, and it's supposed to be on a nice little efficient cycle. If you have a problematic genotype for ApoE, which I do, so if you have the 4 allele in there, it means that you have less efficient cycle there, and your body can't use even dietary cholesterol as well. And that means that if you take in a large amount, especially of saturated fat, your body's not going to be able to process it as well, especially if it's in combination with that ApoA2 gene. Those two together, a 4 allele and a suboptimal ApoA2, means you do not want to be doing long-term carnivore diets and things where there's a lot of saturated fat present.
And I'll tell you as a pharmacist, cholesterol is not your enemy. Cholesterol is actually an antioxidant. It actually is released because your body senses the inflammation. So when you're not eating the right things, it releases a ton of it to say, I got to go clean this up. But you need it for three things. You need it for your brain. If you're having brain fog and you've got high cholesterol, it's because what you're putting in your body is causing inflammation in your brain. You need it for your sex hormones. That's that energy, that's that drive, that's that muscle mass, your testosterone, your estrogen, your progesterone. If you're postmenopausal or if you've gone through andropause and things just are starting, your get up and go has got up and gone, we need your cholesterol is going to go up because we're trying to get something. We're trying to get something. So you may need some support in that, whether it is, phyto support or whether it is medical support, and you need it for cellular repair. You've seen all the elderly people that have big bruises and the blotchy skin and the super thin skin. You know what? Cholesterol is needed for all those. So don't worry that your cholesterol is going higher. We do want to look at the different HDLs and LDLs and VLDLs, but we got to clean up the diet because, like I said, your body will right size, your cholesterol will right size when we're putting the right things in. So, and so as you said, for the fat sensitive, more Mediterranean and very high omega-3s are going to be critical. Knowing that omega-3, omega-6 balance will be vital for you. Stress eaters, oh my gosh, stress eaters, that DRD, dopamine too.
Yeah, the dopamine pathway is very relevant there, and same with the ADRA2B, right? The noradrenaline receptor. I
Yep.
really think that a lot of people that have issues with addiction and binging tendencies, it's also just because they're anxious, right? And
Yep.
they're just trying to find a way to kind of like manage that
It's
response.
self-soothing. It's
Yeah,
self-soothing.
absolutely. And I have the double deletion in ADRA2B, and it's like, yeah, when you feel that, you want to find a way to blunt that response. And unfortunately, for a lot of people, vices are the things that do that. Food being one of the most primarily available vices that we have modern days. So if you're a high binder for dopamine, or if you have deletions in that ADRA2B gene, then yeah, absolutely, you're a stress eater, and you got to be aware of that.
So stress managing tools, exercise, getting out and doing those walks, and the postprandial being available to move that will all help those. And protein pacing, having small amounts of protein. And in this case, even though I'm big into intermittent fasting, protein every 2 hours really helps keep things more steady and more steadfast. And so the bottom line is, if you're a stress eater, lower those carbs throughout the day. Choose your carbs selectively, but protein every couple hours is going to kind of help keep you even. All right. Circadian mismatch. We didn't get to this, but we can talk about it. Circadian mismatch. And we'll come back specifically on this fat sensitive, stress eater, circadian when we do part two.
Yeah, and food is one of those epigenetic things that does help to regulate metabolism and circadian rhythms, right? So we have a couple of genes that we look at that are relative to that. We have the clock gene and we have the CRY1 gene, and those are both about kind of the management of that circadian rhythm. And if you do have dysregulation there, it means that you need to kind of find ways to time your food properly to help to kind of get that circadian rhythm in alignment. Your body's out of rhythm, so it needs patterns and things that it can work with. So we find that people who have that dysregulation, it's not good to eat all the way up until you go to bed, because that kind of keeps things activating and you're actively digesting things while you're trying to sleep and shut it down. So for those people, front loading your calories a little bit better will work a little bit more for you, and getting a big breakfast, right? And starting the day off in that way instead of pushing it back. Other people do great with pushing back the calories and eating almost all the way up until bedtime, especially carbohydrates later in the day. So you can even use that if you have suboptimal CRY1 or clock. You can actually front load your calories and it'll help you to sleep and get on that rhythm as well.
A lot of people think that clock gene is only in the brain. It's not. Every single organ has its own clock rhythm when it cleans, when it repairs. And so knowing that rhythm also helps you know with your timing. And I will tell you, 2 to 3 hours before you lie down is when you should stop putting food in your mouth, because especially with all the gut issues, the PPIs, the heartburn, the indigestion, a lot of people eat, then they eat too quickly, and then they lie down. You've got to give yourself time and space. So a lot of what I tell people is breakfast like a king or queen, lunch like a prince or princess, dinner like a pauper. Okay, so if you're going to have your heaviest meal, I only eat 2 meals and maybe a snack, but have your heaviest meal earlier in the day, and then maybe a midday, and then maybe some soup or maybe a cup of tea or maybe something real, light. You will digest better, especially with dysregulated clock genes, and you won't lie down with a full stomach, which causes the regurgitation, which causes all of the GERD. So, a couple things to think about there. All right, the final one is the low nutrient type before we jump into our questions. So low nutrient type, let's talk about that.
Yeah, so we look at a bunch of different genes that are affiliated with micronutrients, right? We have your whole methylation pathway, so things like MTHFR, MTR, SHMT1. Those are all really determinant of what kind of B vitamin support you need and what kind of B vitamin support is not for you, because it can create other circumstances where you overmethylate. So getting those nutrients correct is fantastic. And then there's also your detox pathways, right? So like your SOD2 gene, we need to know how your body glutathionizes things, as well as how it conducts that phase one detoxification, because there's different nutrients that support different things, right? So beyond that, we also zoom in with your vitamin D genetics like VDR, CYP2R1, GC. And then there's also like SLC genes. So there's SLC23A1, that's for vitamin C, and there's SLC30A8, and that's for zinc transport. So this can really guide your diet. If you don't transport zinc properly, well, maybe you need to add some zinc sources, right? Some oysters or pumpkin seeds or whatever it is for you. Knowing where this genetic mismatch is means that you can tailor your micronutrient input to it to support those areas that are genetically suboptimal.
And a lot of people don't utilize their D vitamins, or they're given D2, but they don't convert to D3, or they get their D3, but their body doesn't know how to utilize or absorb it. So knowing your DNA 360, knowing your nutrient density, if you've got a ton of gut issues like we've been talking about, zinc carnosine will actually knit that gut back together, where the most zinc that you're going to see over the counter, maybe zinc gluconate if you're lucky, but some zinc sulfate, they're not going to do as much for you. So knowing the specific salt types, knowing specific gene types, knowing for you where you might be low, or where you might be have a hole, then you know where you can add up and make it better. So Justin, we've got a few questions in our Q&A. We're going to jump over to that. You guys have been very attentive, and I love that we've got a lot of great questions. So can you tell me, if I upgrade my DNA 360, will it give me information about diet and nutrition? And if not, where do I find that? So your DNA 360 has a whole diet and nutrition section that you should have. I don't know if you've not been able to find that. But we've added, what is it, 96, 86, 96 new genes?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that he may be referencing that maybe he has the older reports and has the opportunity to upgrade to have the new genes
Okay,
added
got it.
in which case, yeah, absolutely. There's genes like the taster genes, so it tells you about your response to different bitter foods. There's genes that are associated with the conversion of omega-3 and 6, so that's really valuable to know. There's other genes that are associated with like your thyroid health, converting the T4 into the T3, which obviously is very important for metabolism and things as well. There's the dopamine pathway is being expanded. The vitamin D pathway is expanded as well. So yeah, I would say it's worth it, because each and every gene that our own Dr. K added in was only added in for very specific purposes. The more of the genome you sequence, the more expensive things are, and you end up with a lot of fluff, a lot of filler information. So each and every gene that is being added for a reason, and there is in fact things in that diet segment that is being expanded on.
So a lot of people don't realize that when a lot of gene companies tell you they do X amount of genes, they're like Justin said, a lot of the fluff genes, like, can you do this with your tongue? Mm, roll
Yeah.
it up versus you can't. They tell you that. Or that cilantro tastes soapy versus I love cilantro. Those don't make a huge difference. All of our genes are actionable. What does a gene do? What is it meant to do? What can I do differently? I love that our genes are actionable and that you know what you can do. And in fact, Shelley says, with my bad FTO gene, how can I manage my constant hunger? If I already stay away from sugar, if I eat a lot of protein and healthy fat, how can I complete a prolonged fast? Prolonged fast would be a food mimicking fast where you have very low calories, but you're not having just water, but without feeling like I'm constantly starving. I'm going to have you start on this, and I've got some ideas.
Yeah, and so the prolonged fasting, I mean, it's something that you don't do super often either. It's one of those things where you're kind of giving your body what it needs while you're fasting. So you're not actually nutrient depleted in the same ways that you would be doing an actual like water fast. So I would say that that's something that you want to sort of build up to. As far as the appetite regulation components of it, I mean, I would say training your body a little bit prior to attempting the prolonged fast may be in your interest. By the way, shout out because I know who Shelly is. Shout out to Shelly. Um, you can utilize the ketone esters. You can utilize the Garcinias. Coffee has appetite suppressant effects. You can take that during fasts. So there's a few different ways that you can kind of go about that. I'm curious what your thoughts are, Dr. Steph, on that.
So, my first thing is let's look at your macros. I know you're eating a lot of protein. I know you're eating a lot of healthy fat, but let's look at your macros and see how you're actually shaking up. And so that we know exactly. The second thing is with fasting, you want to start with a 12-hour fast. If you've mastered that, where you stop eating at 6 and then by 6 in the morning you're ravenous and ready to go, great. But then let's push it back to 12 and a half hours. Let's push it back to 13 hours. The goal is to get you, if you can, to 16/8, but that could take a while. I would not do a prolonged fast until you've done a regular 16/8 or until you've been able to do a 24 with just coffee, tea, and water. A lot of people try to jump into this massive fasting when their body is not ready. You're not switching back and forth. Remember that fat adaptation between the glucose and between the fat. And depending on how much fat you have in your liver, how much fat you have on your body, and you're not converting, that's too big of a step. I would rather you go lower and slower. Let's look at your macros. Let's find something that's worked. Let's have a little success. And then let's build up. You might want to look at Fasting Like a Girl or Dr. Boz's Keto Continuum, which talks about 8 different forms of fasting and how you rotate through them. I think that's a good place for you to go. Kimberly, how do you feel about drinking exogenous ketones? Love them. What about you, Justin?
I did that right before this webinar.
Yeah.
That's like part of my pre-webinar schedule is having a shot of ketones. It gets me in the mode for that. I just wanted to mention too, just before we move on from the topic of that prolonged fast, we're promoting or we have this BioAge fasting kit, which includes the de-aging test and the prolonged protocol. So the idea of it is that you do the de-aging test and then you do the prolonged fasting and then redo the de-aging test as well. So that's really cool because you can actually see what the effect is on your body's biological aging systems. So I just wanted to throw that in there because that's a really cool thing. But as far as the ketones, I love them and I use them probably 3, 4 times a week. I use exogenous ketones and it really prevents you from having to go crazy with the suppression of protein and things that you would actually need to do from a dietary perspective to get into that state. It just ups the ante within 20 minutes. So I'm a huge fan of using them.
I've used raspberry ketones. I've used ketone IQ. I've used just butyrate, things that convert. I don't have a brand that I'm, totally loyal to. It's the only one I'll use. Most of them, I think, work pretty well. You can get them at health food stores. You can get them online. But I think it's really important when we look at this biological aging. We talked about sarcopenia. We talked about the muscle mass. When I was 36, I was so out of whack and my gut test was so bad that my biological aging was 86. And the company that I did the test with sent me a second kit and said, your ideal weight, your ideal height, there's no way something's messed up, but it was my gut. And we did it again, and I think I was 82. And they said, girl, you got to get help. Well, guess what? I ended up with cancer because I was so metabolically out of whack and didn't understand. I was a pharmacist, but I had not yet done my nutrition work. My whole purpose for getting my nutrition work was all they wanted to do was give me a bone marrow transplant, reset my immune system. Nobody was interested in my gut. Nobody was interested in my food. In fact, they thought I was crazy for even talking about that, but I would have died. So know that all of these little tricks come, and to know your starting point, test, don't guess. Don't say, gosh, I think I'm okay. Get your gut test and say, is my gut out of whack or is it not out of whack? Get my biological aging. Am I 84, but I'm really 64? Well, fabulous. Am I 64, but I'm really 44? Fabulous, but you've got to know because otherwise you're just spitting in the wind. So ketones we're both big fans of. How does your mood affect your energy?
Oh, that's a good question because your brain doesn't know the difference between a real threat and a perceived threat, right? So when you have even just thoughts that are really like ruminating, you have kind of stressed out thoughts and feelings, it kicks on what's called the HPA axis, right? Which is this thing that kind of governs the fight or flight response in the body. And when cortisol goes on, your liver releases glucose, right? And your body has this whole energy conservation system that's in place when you feel stressed. And stress comes in so many different forms. But if you're constantly in a bad mood and you're grumpy and you're thinking negative thoughts, that alone is very taxing on the nervous system because your brain doesn't know the difference between actual bad stuff happening in real time in front of you and you reliving bad stuff or thinking bad stuff. So it does tax your energy on that level. What do you think, Dr. Steph? Is there anything else besides HPA axis?
Well, I think gut microbiome really impacts it. I think you got to get up first thing in the morning and you got to get sunshine in your eyes because the sunshine is going to trigger. So later in the day, you actually produce melatonin so you can get a better sleep. If you have broken and disrupted sleep, or if you're using a lot of sleep stacks and stuff because you're not sleeping, if your gut is out of whack, we talk about a gut feeling. More of your serotonin and your neurotransmitters are produced in your gut than you realize. And so if you have low energy, it's not usually because you have low energy, it's because you have energy that's weighing you down and you've got to get up and move. So getting out and moving and getting sunlight in your eyes. A study was done that showed 30 minutes of moving first thing in the morning was as effective as a SSRI, which is a serotonin reuptake inhibitor or an antidepressant. You put the two together and it's a double whammy. So I think it's both. I think food can affect your mood. I think lack of energy actually affects your mood because if you go for a walk or if you talk to somebody, if you have a BMW friend, what's a BMW friend? Bitch, moan, and whine. You talk to them, you feel a little better, you get out and move, or you go for a walk instead of going for an ice cream. Both of those can all work in your favor. Now, I know we have a couple questions. We're going to get to more of this. A couple people say, I really want the gut test. I really want the aging test, but I'm in the middle of doing stuff and I don't want to do it right now. You can hold on to it for up until the expiration of your kit. So I would recommend that you plan it within 6 or 7 months, no later than that. Otherwise, I would wait. But if you want to get your kit and you're doing detox or you're doing some other prep and you want to do it in a couple months, not a problem whatsoever. And then, as far as the gut test, it is a poop test. So you'll catch your feces, you'll then freeze it, you'll then send it off. Not quite as bad as it sounds, but that's what you're going to do. And so all of our tests, like our breast test, is an eye fluid, a spit, for the regular DNA test. That's how we get the DNA. Poop test. Is there any other? I can't think. I don't think we have any blood spot anymore that I can think of. So,
Um, I know that the DNA aging originally was a blood spot.
okay.
Um, But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of great information that you can get. I just did a webinar last night with Jessica Halpern, who's on our team, and she does the iridology. So there's actually information that you can derive from your eyes as well, beyond just the tear for the breast 360. So lots of cool stuff. But yeah, if you don't know what's going on in that gut, I mean, that's one of the primary things you got to look at because that is most of your immune system, folks. I mean, it's really important to get a good look at that. So the Gut 360, we work with a company called Jonah, and they've got some really intelligent stuff going on there, and their AI is able to analyze over 2,000 studies a month, which is crazy. Like no practitioner could do that, and it incorporates it right into their algorithms. So it stays up to date with the most current knowledge in the industry about how the gut works. It's really cool.
So James, that answers your question. We're very partial to the DNA 360 gut. Justin, what did you say the reason not to take betaine if somebody has H. pylori?
Yeah, so if you have elevated H. pylori, it's an infection that will in fact damage the stomach lining. So you got to be really careful because then H. pylori infection damages it such that it's more prone to that inflammation and it's really ulcer prone as well. So extra acid can go in and worsen that irritation and increase the risk of harm. So to me, you would want to manage the H. pylori first and then address the acid thereafter. That's kind of the step by step way that you would do it. But if you've got elevated H. pylori and you add in a whole bunch of acid, you actually compound the problem because of the ulcer prones, or Crohn's isn't a word, but you're more prone to the ulcers. So that's why you want to be careful with that. And that's really specific to H. pylori. That's a really important consideration for not making it worse.
Yeah. Sheila asked, any recommendation for working with kids to help chew their food? My daughter bites and swallows. She has all sorts of stomach issues and discomfort. So, one, perhaps cutting it, depending on how old she is, cutting the bites smaller and practicing with her. We're going to count and have her count. You know, reward systems work better than punishment systems. Feeling better is a big reward on its own. And you may start with an external reward, but then work on an internal reward. Have more foods that perhaps are processed, and I don't mean ultra processed food, I mean maybe soups or mushier things. Like last night I did cauliflower, but instead of having raw cauliflower, I sauteed it with a little bit of chicken broth and with some butter, and it becomes mushy, and I use it like cauliflower rice. So making your foods, I think, more softer so that things are not such big, and then just flat out saying, let's slow down, let's and take time to talk, you know. Debbie says, I'm continually confused about coconut oil and coconut butter. Different naturopathic practitioners have differing opinions whether it's a healthy thing or not. What do you think? You go first and then I'll tell you what I think.
Yeah, so I think that they're both something that could be considered healthy. It's just that the coconut oil is going to be a lot more just fat, right? There's not as many different nutritive properties because it doesn't have some of the fiber and some of the things that the coconut butter has. Some people use the coconut oil as an alternative to other cooking oils and things that aren't as good for you. And for that purpose, I think it's fantastic. Coconut oil's got some antimicrobial properties. I use it for oil pulling, right? Like I do it in the mouth every morning. So it's useful, but I think that coconut butter has a little bit more overall nutritional value because it's incorporating more parts of the coconut and not just kind of the isolated saturated fat, which to Dr. Steph's point is in and of itself, there is no problem with saturated fat. We just need to know your genes and a few things to see how much is appropriate. But those are the main differences to my awareness.
Yeah. I love coconut oil, but I like quality coconut oil. I use MCT oil in my beverages in the morning, whether it's tea or coffee, or sometimes just, an herb. I'll do moringa or um, I can say moringa, or I can't even think of my other one right now. But so I like it. Uh, I think you have to be careful depending on if you can process as much fat. Most people find that their bowels will tell them if they're having too much, because you'll end up having very loose bowels or you'll have upset stomach. And so there's a little bit of a dance. We want to look at your DNA 360 for that. Now, a couple of people are asking, where do I find the personality types? These are not in the reports. These are things as practitioners we've pulled together, knowing that there are these. That's why we're going to do the part 2 so we can go back into detail of the other ones. But this is available for replay, and you can go ahead and write those down. I wish those were available, but part of what we try to do on these webinars is give you the above and beyond, and not just what's in the reports, but how to interpret them. And that's why working with a practitioner can be so beneficial, is to get all the nuances. Lisa asked, I can't stress the importance of gut mapping enough. My gut was destroyed by COVID, but I didn't exactly know how until I got my gut zoomer back. I discovered I have intestinal methionine, anyway, the methionine producing overgrowth, and everything has been eating for years has been feeding this monster in my small intestines. I've been fasting, I've been doing fermented foods, I've been doing great fibers like avocado and flax seeds, only to discover that all these things were feeding the monster. I also have PCOS and insulin resistance, so that's polycystic ovarian syndrome. I'm now trying to fix it with a low FODMAP, and I'm restarting. Only to say, I've been fueling the beast. I wish I had known. Yeah, that is so true, Lisa. So everything is really starts in the gut. And I know some people believe that and some people don't, but I'll tell you, for my personal health, for my family's health, anytime things start to go down, we go, okay, let's get back, let's clean up that gut, and let's make a difference. Where are the genes that make someone more susceptible to chronic H. pylori, and what would you recommend? Sheila, there really aren't genes for H. pylori. H. pylori is a pathogen that overgrows due to low stomach acid, due to multiple infections that you took antibiotics for, due to bad eating, just the way Lisa was just talking. So there isn't a specific gene that causes H. pylori or not. Can you share the code for the genes FTO? Is TT the one? I don't know what TT means.
Yeah, so TT is actually the optimal form of FTO. And then the A allele is what's suboptimal there. So if you have an AT or an AA, that's suboptimal. But the TT, if that's what you're referencing, is optimal. If they're both T's, then that's not a problematic genotype.
Okay. If you have normal FTO and MC4R and still overeat, is it just an emotional issue?
It just means that the issue is stemming from other places than the ghrelin and the leptin signaling associated with those genes, right? So again, if you have deletions in ADRA2B, or if you have the high binding dopamine, then I would say that those are more likely contributors there. So it's just not stemming from that particular problem. And absolutely, emotional eating is a real thing. I've done it. I think we've all done it. And there's mood and behavior genes to consider as well. So I'd have a look at that segment in your DNA 360.
Well, we are past 6:30. Do you have one more minute for one or two more questions? Or are you ready to wrap up?
Let's pick one more each, and then we can go ahead and wrap up. Just because as we already discussed, have to do a part 2 to this.
Exactly. What are your favorite types of carbs for people who are AA on their AMY1 gene?
I think that aiming for resistant starches is a really good call, because not only what we discussed before, being that it actually has less of an impact on your blood glucose, but another thing that resistant starches do is they act as prebiotic fibers, right? So it helps, like Dr. Steph was saying, these things help to kind of preface the the probiotics, and they kind of line the intestine rather than going through into the bloodstream and spiking blood sugar. So I'm a big fan of that. I think that fruit is good quality, especially if it's organic fruit. I like honey. I like maple syrup. I mean, there's a lot of different carbohydrate sources, coconut water. But as far as starches specifically, yeah, just cook and cool those potatoes, cook and cool that rice, and it'll create a resistant starch. And there's way more benefits to it.
I'm loving all the feedback that's coming in the chat. I'm loving that they want the second webinar. I'm loving that they feel so encouraged and they've got some answers. I think the last question that I'm going to ask is Susan's. If you have genetics that show lactose intolerance, insulin dysregulation, issues with fat and carbohydrate metabolism, gluten sensitivity. I've been off gluten for 20 years. And you have the FUT-GG gene, which limits veggies. What do I do? So, Susan, you are just describing me to a key T. I have all of those. I can tell you for me, it was know my macros, know my macros, know my macros. You've got to be able to see, at one point there was a 30, 40, 40 that people recommended, and then it was 70, 30, 20. And okay, but what I found is low carb, but that most people say like 1 gram of carb for every pound. I found that was too much for me as a woman. I have to do a little bit less than that. I have to do like 0.8. So I keep my protein because otherwise my insulin goes up because that protein, because I have hypochlorhydria, low stomach acid, turns into glucose and I watch my glucometer spike. So one, get yourself a CGM. Two, get yourself Continuum, which is a free app that'll do your macros. Three, lactose intolerance doesn't mean that you're dairy intolerant. Lactose is only the milk sugar. It is not the protein, which is the whey and the casein. Now, I can't do whey, but I can do casein. I can do hard cheeses. So I can do um, primarily like goat or sheep's cheese because it has less of the allergenicity in it. I watch my insulin real closely. Measure your insulin, not necessarily your glucose. I do ketosis, but I rotate through my fasting periods. So I'll do intermittent fasting 16/8, then I'll go to 20s, then I'll do like a 36, but only once a month because otherwise I lose too much muscle mass. Low carbohydrate veggies, I do arugula. I will do cabbage. I'm a big fermenter, so I ferment foods that I can have those probiotic foods. Um, if you will look at those type of things, I think you might be able to find a little bit of guidance in there. And with that, thank you all for staying to the end of this. I'm sorry we didn't get to everything, but we will be back with part 2. Justin, as always, you are fabulous. You are beautiful. You are brilliant. This is why everybody loves you. Thank you, guys. There is a replay. Go back and enjoy it. Study your genes. We've got tons of discounts that are coming out. You can get your DNA aging, you can get your DNA guts, you can get your DNA 360. We appreciate you being here. You make it so fun with your interaction, and we appreciate you so much. Look forward to seeing you at part 2. Thank you, Teresa. We appreciate you. Thank you, Justin. Have a good night. Thank you to our magic team behind the scenes. You guys are awesome. Bye bye.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great evening.